And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I am super excited to welcome Blaine Lee Pardo to the show. Blaine has a brand new book. It's called Tenure Number Three Extra Credit. And we've got some good news. It's been out about a week now, and it's the number one seller in which subcategory is it, Blaine?
Pulp thrillers.
Pulp thrillers, amazing. I have had a chance to read the book, and it's fantastic. And one thing that I love about it is it feels like it could have been ripped from the headlines without being too on the nose, and if that makes sense. Like it gave me all the feelings that have been felt in society, over the last several years, without being, without exactly picking a specific wound open, if that makes any sense at all. So anyway, Blaine is the author of about 8 dozen books, it feels like at this point, everything from science fiction to thriller to true crime, history, all over the place. And I love talking to authors who diversify their interest. I shouldn't say it like that. Diversify their writing to reflect a lot of their interests. Because one thing I know as a writer, I'm interested in a lot of different things. And people typically want to pigeonhole you to do one thing. But I love it when a writer kind of spreads out and pursues all of those interests. So I think we're going to have a great conversation today. Welcome to the show, Blaine.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad that we were able to do this today. One question that I love to ask people to just kind of get the conversation going is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Probably when I was in elementary school, we had to put on a play, and I took the job of writing the script, and that was fun. It was just fun to be able to do it and then have everybody else act it out. Since then, I've been doing all the acting out between my lobes here, and that's about it. But that was probably my first time that I was like, this is something that would be fun to do for a living.
Yeah.
I couldn't make a living at it for 25 years. I worked at Ernst & Young, the accounting firm in IT. But I retired early and decided, I'm just going to be a writer full time.
So in that time, you were working a full-time day job and then writing as supplemental income / hobby / I'm going to write so I don't go insane.
Yeah. It was, you did on weekends, you did it late at night after the kids went to bed. I couldn't tell you anything that happened in the world of sports for 25 years or so. I could fake my way through it in a conversation, but that was about it. I spent my time off hours writing, and my work required me to travel numerous times. You get stuck in a hotel room, you can sit and watch TV, go to the bar. And in my case, I was like, I'm not going to do those things. I'm going to sit and write.
Yeah. What was the genre that got you started in writing and publishing?
Science fiction. Okay. I got pulled in early to the BattleTech and the Star Trek role-playing game, doing source book material, things along those lines. I'm a gamer from way back. I still am a gamer. Yeah. And I wrote a lot of source books and scenario sets and things along those lines. And it was the heyday of tabletop gaming and role-playing gaming. Everybody had a company running out of their garage, and there was plenty of writing opportunities. It was a lot of fun back then. It was the Wild West. Now it's all big companies like Hasbro getting involved and things like that. But back in the old days, it was a lot of fun to do that stuff.
Well, for a lot of people, and a lot of people kind of in the geek subculture, if you want to look at it that way, getting to write those type of source books and the supplemental material that other people have played and, become part of the lore and all of that. That is like a dream come true. But back in the day, it was a little more accessible than it is today.
It was, a lot of that stuff's gone out of print, but it's still a lot of fun. I wrote for BattleTech for 36 years.
Wow.
Before I was canceled. I was canceled as part of the whole woke culture shift that took place in our country. But I just went out and started writing my own books that weren't tied to a franchise or whatever, creating my own franchise with a business partner and went off from there. So that was a hard thing to kind of walk away from, but it was the best move I ever did. I'm selling more books than I ever did. I'm connecting to more people than I ever did. Couldn't be happier, honestly.
When you write a source book for tabletop gaming and something that kind of grows to kind of be bigger than any one person can wrap their arms around, like what are some of the rules that you like? And there obviously are probably other writers that are expanding this universe as well. And I've talked with people like Bob Salvatore, who have written for the Dungeons and Dragons world, and he's talked a little bit about how they've kind of collectively expanded that world out into different territories. And what was your experience writing for a collective like that?
It was great because in the early days there wasn't any. You were writing the source material that everybody else had to live with,
Right?
Which was a lot of fun when you were in the green fields stage of it all. But once you got going, you really had to become kind of a subject matter expert. You had to read everything that came out, kind of organize it as to stuff you could use and stuff that's just good to know. We didn't have none of it was online. I mean, everybody forgets that really the concept of ebooks is like 20 years old, and that's it. Back in the old days, you just kept stacks of books everywhere around you with little sticky notes in them, just so that you could keep track of what was going on. And as the universe got bigger, the people who own the IPs tend to add in what they call fact checkers, who allegedly are experts in this. I found most of the fact checkers really didn't know what they were doing. And I love it when somebody was trying to tell me, well, but in this book, this is what the author said. And I'm like, I wrote that book, so stop telling me what I put in it. I know what I put in it, type thing. And there were numerous of those types of encounters, etc. But for the most part, it was a great time doing those early years, and that's what got me into novels. The first novel I did was a BattleTech novel, and I did, I think, 12 of those total.
Oh wow!
So, it's what became kind of my gateway drug to getting into doing novels, which got me into writing military history, which got me into writing true crime, which got me into doing more sci-fi, which got me into political thrillers, which got me into all sorts of stuff. Yeah. So, it was a great way to get started and for me to hone my craft a little bit in those early days.
When you were creating games and game lore, did you ever have a game player who basically told you that you ruined their life, or
I've had that from a couple of people. They were like, "Oh, you didn't get the I can't believe you did this to this unit," or I can't believe this happened to this character, and why did you do that? And this bothered me for years. And, it's like, you need to move past it. It's kind of reminds me of that William Shatner bit on Saturday Night Live. It's just a game. Okay? It's just a fictional freaking universe.
Right.
But you have people that did that. I've never been a fan of the guys who wrote fan fiction off of my stuff. That I found more irritating than anything else. It wasn't complimentary. It was obnoxious. Because they came at with a very different perspective. And I think fan fiction writers, some of them do a really good job and really make the transition to being good writers. but I would say the vast majority, 95% of them, are just real crappy fanfic writers and are irritating with their constant requests. I think the hardest part I dealt with was fans, even today, reach out to me. Every week I get at least one or two requests of, hey, you mentioned this in a book, I think. Can you give me the reference for that? Or can you explain what you were going to do with this unit or that unit if you had stayed writing it? And, I'm like, I'm not your encyclopedia. Go Google it, go to the Wikipedia entries for this stuff. That's not my function, is to educate you on something I wrote in 1995. And it's really not fair to ask me a question about something I wrote in 1995. Honestly, that's kind of a cruel trick.
Yeah. Well, my oldest son was born in 1995, and he turned 30 this year. So yeah, just trying to remember that summer that he was born, much less what I wrote that summer. That's
right.
That's
fans seem to think, honestly, and I appreciate that they think I'm this smart.
Of course.
That I've written 110. No, this is 111th book that I've got out.
Wow.
I do not remember everything that I wrote, and I appreciate the fact that they think I do. But a lot of times I'll go, I got to pull up the book and look it up, and I'm not going to go do that. You can pull up the book and look it up.
Yeah. That's such a great point, and this is kind of a side tangent, but I remember I can only speak for myself as a young writer. That first novel or two that you write, you feel like you're putting everything that you've ever thought about anything into this book, and I'll never have anything else to say about anything ever when I finish this book, because everything I am is going into this, and then you quickly learn that, okay, not really. There are other ideas, I can actually think about other things, and we sell ourselves short, but, and then, amplify that by 30 years is,
every book, I'm passionate about every book until it's published.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great way to say it. Yeah.
Because up to that point, I think people forget the mechanical process of writing.
Mm-hmm.
You do a first draft.
Yeah.
Then you do a second draft. Then it goes to the editor. And you may bounce them back and forth with the editor 3 times, maybe more. And I'm one of those people that every time I look at a manuscript, I add more stuff to it, which means there's more stuff for the editor to do. I can't resist that temptation. Okay. Yeah. It's like, oh, this is my final chance. I'll add 1 or 2 paragraphs here, which then require editing, which means it comes back and stuff. Then it goes off. Then you get requests to document all of the appropriate names, etc., for the audiobook narration. Then you listen to somebody else read to you your book, because for 14 hours you have to sit in front of the computer and listen to somebody read your book. And now and then you have to pause and look it up. Did I really write that in the book? And things like that. Make sure that that's all right. And so by the time the book comes out, you've been immersed in reading this book or listening to someone read your book to you 7 times, 8 times. It's like, I'm done at that point. I'm like, I'm not going back into this unless I hate these characters.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about making the jump from writing game manuals to novels. What was the impetus that kind of made you want to take a stab at fictionalizing and kind of implementing all the things that you had been writing up to that point?
Well, you're writing short stories as part of game source books and stuff like that. So I've been writing about these characters for a long time. I wanted to really be able to jump in and do books. The company that owned the franchise at the time, FASA, they were doing, a small number of novels a year. I would go to Gen Con and I called it my annual grovel for a novel. I'd come with 2 or 3 proposals and kind of go, hey, is this my year? And here's what I've got for ideas. And then they'd go, not this year. One year I went with 3 proposals. I had 2 that I was so passionate about. And there was one I threw together literally before I got on the airplane. It was like a half-page thing. Sure enough, that's the one that they decided they wanted to do. So I was like, suddenly that became my favorite one.
Of course.
And it was fun to do. It's really cool. Back in those days, you didn't have ebooks, you didn't have audiobooks. Everything was paperback. Print runs were like 65, 70,000 copies of a book. When it was done, it went out of print, but you got the thrill back then of every book that came out before the indie scene. Every book that came out was in the bookstore. So you could walk into any bookstore in America and see your book, which was kind of cool.
Right.
And I'll admit I flipped my book over so the cover was out.
Obviously.
You have to do that.
You have to do that. Yeah.
It's a compulsion. Yeah. But honestly, it was it was a lot of fun. Some of it was ego, but some of it was just, I naturally wanted to do it. Once I got writing novels, I was like, I don't want to go back to doing source book material. Now, ironically, we're doing a game for our series Land and Sea. I'm back doing game design, doing development, writing source book material, but it's for a game that's tied to a universe I'm writing about. So it's and create it. So
it's kind of reverse engineering it almost.
Yeah. So, you kind of go back to your old skill set and it all comes back. And it's funny how these things kind of cycle back around.
Right. Right. I want to peel back that experience just for a second. You had a couple of ideas you were really passionate about, and then you threw together an idea before getting on the plane, just a half page or so. And that's the one that resonated. Was there anything special about that particular one? Was it just the timing, the market?
I think it clicked it clicked with the guy who was the line operator for BattleTech. He read it and he's like, yeah, this fits within other stuff that we're producing at this time.
Gotcha. There was a hole in the market for it.
Yeah. It was just the right thing at the right time. It was a fluke.
Gotcha.
I wish I'd kept the other ones just for posterity's sake, but I didn't. But it was a great deal of fun. And it's funny, once somebody goes, well, this is the thing I want you to write, it's like, man, now I really need to get the real work begins at that point.
So what was the book that stretched you out of game design and science fiction? Because you've written outside of those genres. What was the first thing that kind of drew your attention away from that?
I've always been just a fan of military history.
Okay.
And if you're writing sci-fi military, you really need to be a fan of military history.
Yeah.
I read a lot of books about the Great War, World War I. I had read about Count Felix von Luckner and the crews of the Ziyadler, which was a merchant, three-masted windjammer in World War I that sailed around the globe, raiding ships and stuff. I mean, in an age of the dreadnought, you had a German count, commanding a three-masted windjammer, flying the seas and stuff. And it was such a cool story. And I was like, I read a lot of military history. I can write military history. And so I wrote that book, and it took a little bit of selling. I'll never forget, one publisher's like, we really like it, but could you make him American? And I'm like, no, because it's a true story. I can't make him American. Well, it'd be better if he was American. Well, he wasn't.
I'm sure it would have been.
Yeah,
it would have been. It's the operative.
I think you think this is fiction. It's not. Yeah. It's real. So, once I started doing military history, I did that for several years, and I still go back to it now and then. Writing in that genre, and I think it's pertinent. Especially with all the things going on politically today, you really do need a sense of history to really put things in the proper context of what's going on.
Yeah.
All this stuff in Portland and Chicago right now. I spent the morning reading stuff on the Whiskey Rebellion, and the school in Alabama when we sent down the 101st Airborne Division to make sure those kids got into school because of segregation and stuff. You have to know your history to be able to articulate to people how all this gets framed in their minds. Otherwise, it's just noise and it's propaganda on both sides. And
Right.
I as a historian, I do my digging. Let's put it that
Yeah.
way.
Several years ago, it was, let me think, 2020, I think before 2020, 2018, 2019, there was a boom in historical fiction books, especially around World War II.
Yeah.
A lot of women's fiction, a lot of romantic historical fiction was a sub part of that, but not all of it. But there was a lot of historical fiction based around this particular time, and I just got to wondering what I would like, why now, and not that some of them were really great books, but it just seemed like there was a groundswell, almost like there was, and I just got to wondering, and one thing that I came up with, just on personal theory, is that the farther we get away from a historical event, the more the details of that get condensed down to bullet points, like especially if we're like in our education system, if you're in high school history, you're going to get World War II is going to come down to a series of bullet points, and then
Yeah.
another decade or two later it's going to be down to 3 bullet points, and then we're going to get down to these were the good guys, those were the bad guys, that was it. And I think we get to a point where we don't want to lose all the nuance from that. So writers will start kind of filling in the cracks of what we do know with how things could have been, to help put a personal face to the story,
I
almost.
think there's some of that. I think some of it is the big publishers go, if they get one book that's a hit in a
Well, there's that as
particular
well.
genre, they start telling all of their other authors, this is what you need to write. Now, my wife reads what I call popular fiction. Call it the Target bestseller
Yeah.
list. She goes to
Hmm.
Target, buys books that are on the bestseller rack and reads
Hmm.
them. And her and I talk about them from a perspective of, she reads a lot of romance and a lot of women's thriller type
Yeah.
stuff, because that's what Target stocks. They don't stock stuff for men, um,
Right.
but she was like, last year, for example, almost every book that she got had time hopping. So you'd read one
Mm,
chapter and it was in 1950, and then you're reading in the
yes.
1980s. Now you're reading present day. Now you're reading in the 40s. Now you're reading, and then by the
Mhm.
end of the book, it would all come together. And she was like, I'm reading 6 different authors who did the same thing. Now,
Yes.
the
Yes.
story is different, but so I think some of it is the big mainstream publishers tend to go down that path and go, hey, everybody, this is what you need to be doing because this is what's selling. But
Yeah.
what's selling is what gets sent to the bookstores and gets sent to Target for their bestseller rack. So it's certain they create the market.
Yeah.
Whether it's there or not is
Yeah.
almost irrelevant to them.
Yeah. Well, and you and I can try to dissect the market, and you know, it there are forces bigger than the two of us at play here. I'm afraid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But speaking of historical fiction and military history, we are a little better than 100 years removed from the Great War, and we get an interesting perspective when you can get far enough away from something where a lot of the passions have cooled surrounding a circumstance, and people are no longer personally invested. Where most of us, um, we can trace back our grandparents or great grandparents when we get to this point, and we're a little less removed. Does when you can get that much perspective on a historical period, does that allow you to approach it a little more neutral, a little more?
Absolutely. 100% correct, Hank. It's all about that distance. I didn't
Yeah,
have to interview any vets from the Great War because there were none
right.
that are alive who witnessed what I was writing about. So I went off documents, I went off paperwork, I went off things I pulled from the National Archives or from various archives from around the globe. And so I just dealt clinically with the facts. Now, in the von Luckner book, because he was also involved with the American liberation of his hometown of Halle in Germany in World War II, I got pulled into a World War II veterans reunion. There weren't a lot of them there, but they were people who had been there, and several of them have written their memoirs. And I'm using these words real loosely. And having read the actual documents of what happened and seen photographs of what happened, and then when you talk to some of the vets, their version of it was completely different. They had themselves doing some very heroic stuff, and their memoirs were better placed in the fiction aisle. And it was stuff that was like, you guys are way off on target on this stuff. And you don't know how much of that is the fantasies of old men and their and valor they believe they did versus things that they just decided, I want my kids and grandkids to think I did these things. So I think having that distance is there. I wouldn't want to write, for example, a Vietnam book at this point, because there's Vietnam vets who are still alive and they do strange things. I wrote a book on the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I am not kidding you. I had a guy at one of the presentations I did at the U.S. Naval Museum get up and tell me about he had parachuted into Cuba with a team of special operatives. They were going to sabotage the missiles, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I looked him right in the face. I said, no, you didn't. Yeah, I did. We came in at 300 feet in a helicopter and bailed. And I'm like, you jump out of a helicopter at 300 feet with a parachute, you're dead.
Right.
Come on. This did not happen. And in his mind, it did. And he refused to buckle on that. And his son was confronting me about it, going, come on, my dad said this happened. It didn't. There's no documentation on it. But you have people that are, when they're living it, they can't help but project what they want, how they want to be viewed in that history.
Yeah. How do you transition to true crime from that?
Well, I've always been a fan of true crime. I started with a crime that I actually remembered from my hometown in Michigan. There was a bombing in a very small town in Michigan, Marshall, Michigan, where I was raised. And I was in town that day that bombing happened. I was 4 years old at a birthday party in a park, and I remembered just parts of it. So I did the research and wrote that book. And then my daughter, who's always been a fan of true crime, she just loved it because she had been there. We would go there and she'd be like, that's where that took place. That's where this took place. Yep. So she said, if I ever get a chance, we ought to write something together. So the next book that came up that I did, I said, you want to write a book with me? And it turned out to be a bestseller.
Not bad.
23 years old. She got on the New York Times Crime and Justice, I think, list that they used to have. We were on the list. I was like, and all I got for Christmas was like a tie that year. And I was like, I got you on the bestseller list,
I'll bet for her
together, and we've written several books together, all true crime. And it was just, it's fun to do with your kid,
I'll bet that will ruin you as an author, though, coming out of the gate and having success like that, where here you've been, grinding for, probably 20 years at that point.
I didn't care. I there are times I'm like, wow, talk about the luck of the draw. But in the end, I was absolutely just pleased that the book was being
Yeah.
received, and we tend to focus on cold cases, and it's just a lot of fun to go through those. Uh, True crime is a little bit harder than everything else because you get very emotionally vested in it. You're interviewing victims, family members, law enforcement. You're going through police reports, trying to organize something maybe from the 1970s or 80s
Right.
that they didn't figure it out. So you've got to lay out all the pictures and all of the reports and try to organize it so that a reader can actually comprehend, logically, this is what
Mhm.
happened in what sequence and how all this came to play. And it was interesting. It's fascinating to do, but it does take a lot out of you emotionally.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you because going from writing 100 plus years ago to the Great War, where, like we said just a few minutes ago, we all have enough distance between that we're not personally invested in what happened there. We can trace our history there, of course, but we're not personally invested. When you're talking about true crime, true crime, that, even if it's 20, 30, 40 years ago, there are probably people that are still invested in that
Oh,
happened,
yes.
that unsolved case sometimes. And I would imagine that those feelings can still be raw for a lot of them. So how do you approach this topic, as neutral, with as neutral a perspective as you can, while also understanding that this is something that is very important to at least a segment of people out there? Like, are there landmines that you have to be careful of?
There are definitely landmines. There are people with agendas. I think the thing that surprised me most is we dealt with one person who I've had this happen on two books actually, where somebody who is associated with the crime or a victim's family going, "How can I make money on this?
Mm,
You're making money on it. I should be making money on it." I had, and I've had that twice happen with me, which really leaves a bad taste in your mouth. You do get accused of, "Hey, you're profiting off the death of my aunt, my uncle, whatever." Um, but at the same time, it's like, look, I'm just trying to tell a story here. And,
right.
I will say that in every book we've done on a cold case, we've generated new tips and leads for law enforcement, and we pass those on to them. People reach out to a writer before they'd call the FBI. Okay. And every single time we got a tip or lead, we passed it on to the authorities, etc. So
Have,
I
have
like to
you
think we do some good.
have you ever explored the psychology of why people would reach out to you, the writer, with a tip and not law enforcement?
No,
That
I
that's
don't
an
try to go
interesting.
down that dark alley. Because you're like, look, this happened in 1986. Why didn't you say something then?
Right.
And sometimes again, you're dealing with people's bad memory.
Yeah.
And you get people in the recent case what we did on the Colonial Parkway murders, where they finally last year found via DNA who did these crimes. They're fairly certain at this point. He definitely did three of the crimes.
Mm.
Um, so, now that you've got the DNA thing, you still have people arguing, well, no, I think it's Bob down the street who did it. And it's like, did you miss the news report? I mean, they nailed this guy. No, it's all wrong. Police got it all wrong. I'm like, DNA isn't wrong. Okay.
Right.
DNA is solid. I'm
Right.
sorry. Your theory doesn't hold up against the reality of the facts. And
Yeah.
you do deal with a lot of that. I will say a number of the interviews I did, I had on a poker face during those. I try to be as professional as possible, but you get in the car and you bawl your eyes out because
Mm,
this is these people have been dragged through hell and back,
yeah.
and it's terrible. It does. It's very draining. And I don't think people understand it. And I have to kind of summon it in me. I've been asked to do an update to that book, my daughter and I, and we've been working on it, but I can't just jump into it. I have to have the right mindset. I have to have everything clear, and then I can jump in and work on it. And then you have to extract yourself from it again.
Yeah.
So it's true crime is very hard, but it's also incredibly interesting. The dynamic, having gone to Crime Con, which is a convention of true crime fans, I guess you'd call them.
Yeah.
I only went once because I gotta tell you, it's a little creepy weird. These are people who sit around watching ID Discovery all day, or
Yeah.
Oxygen Channel, and it's 90% female. They're all like fanatics with this stuff, and it does get a little creepy. It's one of those things where it's like I'd go back if I was invited, but I'd really have to think about it.
How do you choose a story to highlight and to really dig into? Because I would imagine there are a million unsolved cases. But what is it about these particular cases that you sense there's a story there?
Well, I usually look for stuff that hasn't been made into a book yet, because a
True.
lot of the unsolved cases haven't. We've done 2 serial murder sprees that haven't been covered in books, which is Colonial Parkway murders and the Freeway Phantom in Washington, D.C. in the 1970s. And so no one had done books on those. So, that's one. 2, there has to be something that's got a unique twist to it, or some aspect of these crimes are different. With the Colonial Parkway murders, it was always couples being killed, 2 people at a time. Not necessarily romantic couples, but just 2 people at a time in each one of those murders initially when until they solved the case. Then, in the Freeway Phantom, you had the Phantom sending a note to the police taunting them. It's things like that make it real intriguing.
Gotcha. From writing true crime with your daughter and you having obvious success with those, where did Braxton Knox come from? Because this series, this 10-year series, is so good, and like I alluded to when I introduced you at the beginning, it feels like this feels like stories that I've read about, that I've watched on the news, but they, obviously you've added your own flavor and your own twists and turns. Like how do you see something and go, okay, this would make a story without just being obviously on the nose?
Well, as I said, I went through cancellation like so many conservatives did. And my co-author, Mike Barron, went through cancellation. And Mike Barron started out writing in the comics. He wrote The Flash. He was one of the guys who wrote The Punisher, which, was a vigilante comic book series, and really kind of tied in with the old Mac Bolan executioner novels out of the 70s and stuff. It really tied into that whole vibe. And so I talked to him at one point and I said, I'd really like to do something with you, together on a book. And he goes, well, let's do it. And he goes, what do you have in mind? And I just threw out the idea, like a one-liner. I said, let's do a version of the Punisher who goes after the woke. And he was like, okay, I'm in. And that's how it all started. So we started with a college professor who doesn't use the appropriate pronoun, and he's out in Portland, Oregon. He loses his job. He loses his house. He eventually loses his daughter and his wife to violence as a result of all of this because of Antifa, etc. It was easy to leverage all these elements that are out in our society, which we see playing out on TV this afternoon in some cases. And then he decides to go after the people that caused this problem in his life. And he becomes a vigilante. And we just went into it. The second book, we said, let's talk about that baker that was asked by a gay couple to make a gay wedding cake, turned them down, ended up going to the Supreme Court, etc. Well, we did it as a candy maker type thing and did it in a different city, but we pursued that as the impetus. The new book really ties into Peanut the squirrel and what took place with Peanut the squirrel and Fred the raccoon. We said, well, we'll call it Sheffield the fox. But we went into it and said, let's do that, but have somebody in there getting justice for the people that do it. And that's our character. And it's not, I hate saying it, it's not in depth. It's just good old fashioned, what I would call the men's adventure genre. We used to have books like The Executioner. We had, all of The Avenger. You had all these, wonderful men's adventure books. And you would go to a drugstore and there would be a rack of these things there, and they were 65 cents a copy, and they were thin paperbacks, but they were all about men doing violence on other people.
Right.
And it was fun stuff, and it was like an entire genre, and it led to the entire action movie genres of the 70s and the 80s, etc. Dirty Harry was a byproduct of all that stuff. So was John McClane. We've gotten away from all of that, and now Mike and I jump back in, and we're like, we're going to write those kinds of books. So the chapters are short, they're punchy, they follow that whole Mac Bolan Executioner vibe to them, because we want people to experience the same joy we did when we were younger and we read those books.
So, would you say that you have identified the market for your books and are doubling down on what those people are not finding other places in the book world?
Yeah, you hear it all the time. It's a great way to kind of paraphrase it, but you hear it all the time where people are going, there's no men's books out there. Well, there are. You got to know where to look for them. They're usually indie books. But there's a lot of these types of books that are starting to emerge. And I know that if you're a progressive left-wing person, you're going to hate my books. You're going to hate the Blue Dawn series too. I'm not trying to write for you. I'm not trying to write something that's for everybody. I'm writing for people who want to read this type of stuff. And everybody, if you talk to anybody who's conservative, who's male at one point or another, they're like, you tell them the story of, here's what I went through with my cancellation. They're like, why didn't you just get a gun and go kill this guy? Well, that's what the character does. That's how the character deals with it. I don't do that stuff. But Mike and I, having gone through this, we've been able to bring real life stuff right into it. And it makes it very plausible. People read it and they go, I know this is fiction, but I can see this happening. I believe that this could happen. And I think that's part of what people want. They want to know there's a way out of all of this.
Well, one thing that has become interesting in the indie publishing space, and then we've got you're published this book through Wargate Books, which is friends of ours, Nick and Jason, and a very indie-minded company, but really a bunch of indie authors that have kind of bound together to bring their collective talents together. What we're finding is that in this new publishing space, this market, you can afford to be more how shall we say, specialized, and find your particular audience. You don't have to write for everyone. You don't have to market to everyone. You can find the people that would enjoy your kind of stories and write stories for them and market to them. And there's room enough. And if there are people on the opposite end of the political spectrum that want to do the same thing, there's an audience for them. And everyone can can sell to the people that enjoy what they're making. And
Well,
isn't that the isn't
it,
that what free market publishing should be about?
it really is. Mainstream publishing wouldn't touch a book like this in a million years. I wouldn't even think of sending it to any of my and I have friends that are in mainstream, but I used to write in mainstream publishing. I used to write for Penguin Putnam. So I get
Yeah.
it. I know the mainstream stuff. They wouldn't touch this if I with a 10-foot pole. Same thing with my Blue Dawn series, which is about a second American Civil War after progressives and Antifa violently overthrow the government. I wrote it in 2019. And now you're seeing parts of these things actually start to play out. It's amazing the amount of things I got right, in that interim period in that series that are there. And there's a lot of places like Wargate, Defiance Press, other type of publishers that are like, look, we know who our audience is. It's not who the mainstream guys are going to.
Mhm.
We have a niche, and our niche will enjoy what the content that you're creating. My job is to be an entertainer. I'm here to provide you entertainment. I'm not pushing a huge political agenda. My job is to tell really good stories with fantastic characters. I want to make sure if you spend $8.99 on a digital book, you're getting $20 worth of
Yeah.
kick out of it. And you're going, yeah, you may get done and go, God, I'm mad as hell having read this book because it's so damn close to the real world. And I get a lot of that, but you'll buy the next one because
Right.
you want to see more of the same. And I know who my market is, and I'm giving them what they want my way in an entertaining way. And I think a lot of writers have forgotten how to be entertainers, and that's part of the job I have is to entertain my fan base.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is tenure 3. This is the third book in the
Yeah.
series. Are there more stories with these characters that you'd like
Are
to
you
tell?
kidding? The news media kicks out stuff every day. We're working on book 4 right now, and I'll ruin it for your fans here. There was Mike and I stumbled across this article about the Zizians. Have you heard of these guys?
No.
It's a transgender vegan cult that has been going around killing federal officers. True story.
Oh.
And Mike and I, we saw the article. We sat back and forth with each other. He goes, well, you know what we're doing for book 4, right? I'm like, yeah, we're totally doing it. So we don't call them the Zizians. We call them the Vivians. And we go right into it. And a lot of what we're leveraging is stuff that we have pulled from our research of this real life cult that has been going around the country killing people.
Wow.
And we decided Braxton Knox is going to go after them. So we've been having fun with that. And yeah, we're going to step all over a lot of people's sensitivities along the way. But that's part of what this is. It's part of a journey that our character needs to go on.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's fantastic because the media every week gives us something new where Mike and I are like, we have to file this because we may want to come back to this at some point.
Yeah.
We're halfway through on book 4 already.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's amazing.
Mike
Blaine,
is so great to work with. Jeez, oh Pete. If you ever get a chance, Hank, to interview Mike Barron, I recommend it highly.
I will. We'll reach out to Mike for sure. Blaine, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into your massive back catalog and get into everything that you're about and that you do, where's the best place to connect with you online and to get into reading Blaine Pardo?
Go to Amazon.com, type my name in. You'll get a whole bunch of stuff. Find something that you think is going to fill your itch and scratch it. If you want to follow me, I'm on social media all the time on Facebook. I'm all the time on Twitter or X. I'm on those platforms. I'm unabashed. I have a website. I rarely go to it. I'm there because I feel obligated to have a website at this point. That will be changing at some point. those are the places to follow me. Follow me on social media. And if you really want to get to know me, read my books.
Great. We'll link up all those places in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find you. Blaine, this has been so much fun chatting, and thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Hank. I appreciate it.